Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on transforming cyber resilience, mastering comprehensive threat defense with Cisco XDR. My name is Nasreen Shams, Assistant Vice President of Business Development here at Stratagem. The state of security today is a world of silos, and it's been fragmented and is complicated. This is a symptom of the larger issue, which is the fact that the cyber landscape is very complex. The end user has been left on the hook, and it's a failing methodology. Some key takeaways that you'll be learning about in this webinar today is that as defenders, we need to elevate our ability to defend. Defending is very complex. A threat cannot be reduced to a single URL, domain, or IP. It's all about context. And ultimately, XDR provides actionable intelligence to provide actionable outcomes. Moreover, you need a strategic partner and a strategic strategy to be able to overcome the modern challenges in cybersecurity. Enter Managed XDR. The value of this product and this solution and this service is really to reduce the mean time to detect, mean time to contain, and mean time to resolve an incident, which leads to cost savings by reducing incident response times. Some key takeaways from this presentation today: you will learn about reducing alert fatigue, cost efficiency and resource optimization, and also faster incident response and remediation, ultimately breaking down the silos in cybersecurity. So I want to present to you our first speaker, Talal Iqbal, Director of Cyber Intelligence here at Stratagem. Over a decade of experience, Talal is a seasoned information security professional, proficient in overseeing diverse industry security technologies. As well, Talal is an active member in the educational arm of cybersecurity. He's been teaching various courses in information security across Canada. In addition, I also want to welcome Jason Maynard, Field CTO at Cisco Security Canada. With over 20 years of experience, Jason excels in crafting and implementing advanced security solutions for intricate computing landscapes. And also, as a Field CTO at Cisco Systems, Jason is a distinguished voice in the cybersecurity realm, renowned for his dynamic contributions at conferences and events, holding over 75 certifications, including the CCIE. So before I hand this over to Jason, I just want to let you know you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. We'll be compiling those questions at the end of the presentation, having our experts answer those, and we'll send it out in email in addition to the link to the recording for this presentation today. And ultimately, we will be drawing for the Cisco drone at the very end of this webinar. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Jason for him to share some of his technical insights and how a partnership with Stratagem and Cisco can help you on your cybersecurity journey.
Awesome, thank you so much. I assume everyone can see my screen. Yep, okay. All right, so Cisco Extended Detection Response. Defending is complex. It's a tough business. Nobody cares about all the threats that we block day in and day out. The only thing that really matters at the end of the day is if a threat gets in, is how your ability to be able to respond to that threat and have actionable outcomes that minimize your overall risk to an organization. And so one of the things that we all know is all protections fail. Doesn't matter the vendor that you deal with, Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Alto, defense will fail. And so we have protection mechanisms on some of our endpoints, not all of them, because we have IoT-based devices that exist in our infrastructure that may not allow us to install an agent on it. And if you're fortunate enough, you might have some additional detection capabilities, leveraging the network as an early warning detection system that's providing telemetry and information. And then you have workloads, right? The services that your customers and users are leveraging. And again, you might have some controls, you might have firewalls in place. Ultimately, these controls will fail. And the adversary, once landing on one of those assets, is going to make their way throughout the organization. And we see this time and time again. We see breaches and significant impact to organizations, although they feel that they've done all the right things, right? They went and bought best of breed technologies, they've tried to integrate them, they've operated them, they've got processes supporting them, and we continue to see failure time in and time out. And so when we look at that, these threats aren't about an IP or a URL or domain. Those are commodity-based controls. We're going to continue to do those. They get rid of the noise. They stop some threats from happening or being realized. But we need to advance our ability to be able to truly understand the context of the threat. In fact, I'm a big believer that we need to understand the adversaries that are targeting our specific verticals and build defensive capabilities in order to mitigate their ability to take advantage of any of the weaknesses that we may have within the environment. So we've got these TTPs or tactics, and I'll talk a little bit more about those, but things like spear phishings or defense evasion, you've got privilege escalation, credential access. These are all mechanisms that the adversary needs to do in order to be successful in their campaign. And all we have to do as defenders is find ways of mitigating one or more of these, obviously more the better, in order to make it very difficult for the adversary to overcome. So ultimately, what we want to do is be in a position to understand the adversaries targeting us. And this is where it gets a little bit more difficult, right? It's not about setting up a firewall and adding advanced malware and IPS and walking away and addressing the alerts as they come in. It's about actually researching and understanding the adversary and their ability to wreak havoc within the organization. And so there's things called tactics and techniques and procedures. It's all centered around the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And when we look at Wizard Spider, an adversary that exists that targets multiple organizations, there's certain things that they do in order to operate within your environment. And so for initial access, they use things like remote services or valid accounts. For execution, they use WMI or Windows Management Instrumentation. And this is getting a little bit more technical, but the nuance here is that the adversary operates and needs certain things in order to be successful. And even though you may not be able to control all of these aspects, if I can control many of them and then have detection capabilities where I can't provide a preventative capability, it makes it very difficult for the adversary to overcome. And so something like valid accounts is used in initial access, persistence, and privilege escalation. And so if I can minimize my exposure for the adversary of harvesting credentials or getting credentials and just logging into our platforms, maybe it's things like risk-based authentication, multi-factor authentication, and things like that that help make it difficult for them to overcome, and their barrier to entry within the organization is difficult. And so when you look at the defensive nature that we've been focused on, it's really been around, hash values, addresses, IP addresses, domain names, URLs, etc. But the problem with that is that even though they get rid of a lot of the noise, and you're going to continue to do so, they are easy for the adversary to overcome. So the pyramid of pain that was created is really about invoking pain on the adversary if you remove their ability to use these observations or indicators as defenders, as we know them as defenders, from the adversary's ability to execute against them. And so as you start climbing up the stack and you get into TTPs, this makes it very, very difficult. It gives us better context into the adversary and their ability, and also it allows us to put in the right measures in place to defend the organization at a layer that's difficult for the adversary to overcome. So that's the pyramid of pain. MITRE ATT&CK framework, if you're not familiar, that's certainly an area that you may want to focus on. Now it's time to level up. It's really about moving up that stack and understanding it, and then enriching all of the data points that I might have in the organization, regardless of product. So XDR should be able to collect any detections. This could be raw telemetry. It's sensors within the organization that already exists. So if you have an EDR product, there's no sense throwing that capability out. Leverage that capability and feed it into an XDR platform. Same thing with email. You have email security from another vendor. You want to be able to pull that data in. The goal here is to truly normalize that data and give you full context into the threat beyond an IP. The IP is an observation, right? It could be an indicator of such activities that suggest bad. but at the end of the day, the IP might be associated to a domain that might have been in an email that also had a process that was invoked on an asset that reached out to another IP address, and that's the full context of the threat. And then ultimately, you want some guided response across those multiple control planes. You want to be able to understand not only the threat in full context, but have the ability to drive outcomes regardless of the technology stack that you're operating in across that ecosystem. So on your endpoint detection response, I might want to drive an isolation response action. Or an email, I want to block the email sender from sending to us so we don't get any more of those attachments. A SHA-256, I might want to block that in my next-gen firewall or my cloud security element that I might have. So the goal here is not only to understand the threat, but also be able to respond to it and drive towards cyber resilience. So when you look at it, you've got email, well-tailored, personalized, looks real, looks legit, user clicks on it. Now that creates a tactic from the MITRE attack framework called spear phishing. That could be vendor A. Then you've got a domain that is in the body of that email that they clicked on, or it could have been a weaponized PDF, and it uses that domain, and it could be a questionable website. And that data might exist in another platform. And this could be drive-by compromise or account discovery. And then you move on, which leads to a strange process being executed on the machine. That then has process injection. That might be from another vendor. And then that process makes a connection outbound. And so all of these individually might be indicators of bad, but having full context wrapped around that and having a visualization of an attack chain is tremendously valuable. It puts the threat in context. So keep that in mind. And what I want you to think about is, how do you do this in your organization today? How do you go about an indication of compromise and drive out full context across the breadth of technologies that you might have? And you might have lots of different tooling that you leverage to drive towards that outcome. You might have very strong processes that support it, or you might leverage a partner to help drive towards it. Regardless, just think about some of the complexities and nuances that exist in truly understanding the threats within the organization. And at the end of the day, you as operators or defenders shouldn't be on the hook for the integrations, right? That's the biggest challenge that we've seen in the industry. We bought all these different technology stacks, and the operator is left with trying to make it all work. And then somebody upgrades code and it breaks the connection, and then you're almost starting over. Maybe you don't even know what's happened. And so when you look at XDR, the ultimate goal is we want to detect sooner, right? Early warning detection systems. And we want to be able to not only detect that from an endpoint, but also from a network or cloud perspective, and have holistic view across the entire ecosystem. We want to be able to understand the asset and the context and the associated threat to that asset. We want to be, and based on that, be able to prioritize that based on the overall impact and the value of the asset. And then we want to reduce the investigation time, accelerate our ability to understand the threat in better context, but also accelerate that response. As I mentioned, that could be through playbooks, through automation, or it might be as simple as an analyst reviewing the data and deciding that this is a change control that allows them to make a decision on the fly and prevent or put a control in any one of your mechanisms within the organization. So we look at the high-level architecture. As I mentioned, it's all about third party as much as it is, say, with Cisco. You can't operate in any environment without being open. And so we want to be able to take that telemetry sources from multiple different platforms, feed it in. That could be cloud, network, email, identity, firewall, and endpoint. That's going to come in multiple different forms. There's going to be detections that are wrapped around that, whether that be behavioral analytics, anomaly detection. Attack chaining is pretty neat, right? Pulling the attack together and understanding it in context. And then you'll have incident creation, prioritization, and then automatic enrichment on top of that. And then you might want a response action based on your investigation. So, and you want to have that pipeline built out for you. You don't want to have to think about where do I need to go next. You want that pipeline built out. I'm going to show you a little bit about that as well. But response could be user triggered, as I mentioned earlier. It could be based on an incident. It could be scheduled. It could be based on automation as well. And there's lots of different ways that the response action can be driven. And we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go along. So extended context, as I mentioned, this is almost like I think of it like an application store where you can pull in your Cisco technology as well as your third-party technology stacks into the extended detection and response platform. Most of this is pretty simple. It's API driven. It's a key, the API, and you're pretty much done for many of these integrations. So they're pretty simple to realize very, very quickly. So when we look at the sources of that telemetry, you can see here, flow logs, the network provides tremendous amount of telemetry. You can't abstract the network. In order for an adversary to be successful when they land on any specific asset, they have to traverse the environment. They can't take data or steal data. They can't communicate without leveraging the network. And so the network becomes this early warning detection system that we can run behavioral analytics against, know what normal looks like, and feed any of that alert logs, whether it's on-premise, whether it's in AWS, Azure, GCP, in the branch, from a firewall, or even the remote worker that's at home that's no longer connected natively back into the data center as we traditionally have seen in the past. We want to collect all that telemetry. Reason being is the adversary may be compromised when they're at home. Or sorry, the adversary compromised would be a good thing. The user may be compromised when they're at home. And so there's certain telemetry there that's tremendously valuable of understanding the full context of the threat. One might be the flow data, but also what about the DNS-based requests that might have went to an ISP? Well, if you don't have that telemetry, you've lost it. And then they come into the organization, they plug in, and it wreaks havoc. Or they come in through their VPN connection, and again, it wreaks havoc. Third-party intelligence, as well as it being powered by Cisco Talos, is certainly valuable of enriching the entire stack of capabilities that we have with telemetry across multiple different sources. And then you have integrations, as I mentioned earlier, right? SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Proofpoint, Microsoft Defender, Amazon Cloud or GuardDuty, all of these are, and this is just a subset of the example here, as well as Cisco. So these can all drive events within the XDR platform. And then again, as I mentioned, we can start building out the attack chains and get a better context of the overall threat versus just an indicator or an observation. And the other thing is device insights. So understanding the context of the device itself. And so the challenge we as defenders have is getting as much information as we need when we need it. And the problem is that you might have Intune as an example for your MDM, and then you might have, a third-party endpoint detection response technology. You might use something like Umbrella for DNS. All of them have insight into the device itself, and all can provide tremendous amount of value and insight to the defender when they're trying to understand the overall risk. And so what we've done is that we've taken all of these different sources of data, brought it into the XDR platform, and created a unified single record with all the data that's unique between all the different platforms in one record for the analyst to be able to review. And then we've got APIs. Obviously, everything's about APIs today. You can't live without it. And I've got a little joke about the API is the new back door. The other thing is it's almost come full circle where at one point people were doing CLI. That's where I came from originally. Then they said I want a GUI, right? And now everyone wants the API to build programmatic outcomes that kind of feel like a GUI again. But anyways, I digress. So telemetry and enrichment, as I mentioned. So we get lots of it. And again, depending on the integrations, you might be able to do an enforcement mechanism. You might be able to enrich. You might be able to get device data. Again, it depends on the integration and the source. But you can see you've got all kinds of different technologies across the board that are all now being centrally located and taking in those alerts, the raw telemetry, the logs. They're all being stored in the XDR data warehouse. And those data, the events and intelligence are fetched through that entire ecosystem and added to incidents and investigations for the analyst to be able to accelerate their ability to understand what might be happening in the organization. Now, when we talk about devices themselves, as I mentioned, this is an example of some of the data that we can pull to create that unified device record. And so you can see Duo, Secure Endpoint, Umbrella, Meraki. It goes on the Cisco side. So they all provide a certain amount of telemetry in regards to the device itself. And when I'm saying telemetry, I'm not talking about the adversarial based indicators or observations, right? I'm talking about the actual context of the device, what operating system, what security policies enabled, what does Intune say about the device itself? And again, it just provides better insight. Who's logged into the device as another example. And then we've got our third parties that are also feeding into that. And here's a quick example of that. So you've got an associated user. It's logged in, last active, the location, the host name, the local and public IPs, the MAC address, the hardware ID, the serial number. Now, and then before it shows you, or sorry, below that, it shows that the sources that we've seen and pulled that data from. And so Secure Endpoint also includes, hey, we've got the policy of protect on that particular asset and the group that it's associated with, the installation, the connector version. And then Orbital, this is OS query to pull forensic data from our Secure Endpoint. But again, doesn't matter if you want a forensic element to it, obviously, and you have an investment somewhere else, you can certainly leverage that. But again, it's just showing you details around the local users that are on the machine. So a little bit more data around it, but this is that unified record. If you had Intune, that would be here as well. And it might say Windows Firewall is enabled on the asset as well. Now, enhancement. As I mentioned earlier, we've got judgments, you've got indicators, you've got feeds and events. This is all now being centrally located in extended detection and response. And Talos obviously is going to be a strong contributor to that intelligence, but you can pull in things like VirusTotal, Pulse Dive, and many others like Shodan and all kinds of different, depending on the needs of the organization, to further enrich that. And we tell you where that source of data comes from. I'll show you that in an example in a minute. Now, when you log into the platform, you get the control center. The control center kind of gives you a dashboard, and you create and share these based on your needs and share them with others if you choose to do so. But it's a time frame, last 24 hours, last 30 days. And it kind of gives you an idea of where you sit, depending on the dashboards that you integrate into the platform. So for example, you can have something from Secure Network Analytics as an example. This is a network-based behavioral analytics platform that's showing you, worm propagation and the number of alarms by count that it's seen over time. You can also see unassigned incidents that may exist as well. But again, you can customize the control center as needed. When you're investigating, you get a little bit of data all at once, but we don't drown you with data. We show you what's important. You can drill into it to get more details for specific things as needed. It's color-coded. It's got a timeline, built-in response. So that's really neat from a responsive perspective. If you can see here context, and we'll drill into this a little bit more, and color-coded, so you have a good insight into what might be happening here. Looks like a lot of unknowns, right, in this particular scenario. But down here are my events, and then from here I can click on that little button if you can see it, and it'll give me a drop-down menu, and that drop-down menu will allow me to take action depending on the integrations I might have. So you could leverage the network and use something like a NAC or Identity Services Engine to drive a control from a network perspective, or you could isolate a host because it has the ability to do that with the host itself, or drive an IP block list in a firewall in your next gen firewall platform for being able to communicate outbound from the assets that might have been communicating to a malicious IP address that you're currently not blocking. So it's all about context, as I mentioned. And so in order to have context, you need intelligence, both from a threat perspective, but also in regards to your organization and the data points that exist. So for example, when we look here, you know, we're back at those observations, right? We've got a file hash, an IP address, a domain URL, email address, whatever it might be, to suggest bad is happening. Now that's okay. We've got some data to work from, but we probably want to reach out and find out, have we seen anybody communicating with that IP address, or has anybody executed that file hash within the organization, right? What domains have people went to in the organization that might have been malicious or identified as malicious? And so what you want to be able to do is ask that question, get that data back, and be able to then drive specific outcomes, whether that's blocking destination files or isolating logs. And so when now we shift from this, you know, incident or an alert that gets created in an organization, which typically happens, and again, I want you to think about this a little bit, is how do you take that first incident, however you might have gotten it? It could have been in a blog, it could have been a leader said, hey, I heard this on the news. How do we sit today in regards to, you know, defending against that particular campaign? How many tools do you go into? So what we've seen in the industry is that some people will take that SHA and they'll go into their endpoint detection and response platform and they'll search for it, and then they'll go into email and search for it. And you know, there's multiple different consoles that they might log into. And then when you're driving response actions, we've got multiple different teams. You're going to ask the endpoint team, the networking team, you know, maybe even the cloud team. But there's multiple different teams that you're going to coordinate with to get certain changes implemented in the organization to reduce the risks that you've discovered based on that initial investigation. Where with XDR, we see significant reduction in time. And the reason being is that data is collected and streamlined and processed for you so you can make decisions quicker and drive outcomes without having to log into multiple different platforms. So here's an example. An analyst or automation, right, wants to know specifically about certain indicators or observations, and they do that search. It goes out across your intelligence feeds. It might go into your integrations, your Cisco products, and that information is going to come back. And that information is going to come back in multiple different forms. Some people may not see it as a threat. Others may see it as a threat. Again, it's the arms race, right? Cisco might find it first, and then others may miss it, so it looks benign. But the bottom line is, where was it? Where did I see it? And then what actions, what source do I trust most? And do I take action against that across the ecosystem? So when we look at the raw telemetry, we can get this from multiple different sources. So behavioral analytics, when looking at the behavior itself, we can get that from the endpoint using, on the Cisco side specifically, the network visibility module. So this is every process or connection ever made from the device itself. You've got anomaly detections, role-based analytics, data movement analytics. So data moving within the organization might suggest either a change in operations, or it could mean that somebody's harvesting some data before they exfiltrated it. And so behavior becomes a core component of it. You get cloud-based alerts. So whether this is AWS, GCP, or in Azure, leverage those native controls to drive specific outcomes when mitigating risk. Any configuration changes. So things like, hey, wait a minute, an EC2 instance started, right? They probably want to know about that. Especially if there's other telemetry sources that help, you know, identify maybe a potential threat or breach is actually in fact taking place. And then you got global threat alerts. This gets into machine learning, right? AI, all of that, you know, the marketing terms that people talk about, but they're algorithms underneath the hood that are looking at good and bad and making sense of that data to give you better context in regards to whether or not we're looking at a potential threat here or a file that might be benign. And then obviously third-party intelligence that comes in as well. So that could be Talos in the form of malware classification, knowledge and you know, around global campaigns based on any local threats that we might be seeing, IPs or URLs, domains, right? Those commodities, whether or not they're threatening and could cause harm. As we extend, now we get into public cloud detection specifically. And as I mentioned, there's an abnormal user or a startup script that's modified for an EC2 instance. You might have unusual access to APIs from certain geographies. Large EC2 instance obviously started, and there's a bunch of other detections as well. You got networking to endpoint detections, where we look at things like malicious processes detected, amplification attacks, you know, repeated umbrella sinkhole communications, unusual DNS connections. And again, this could be on-premise or off-premise. The goal here is that nothing is being hidden from the analyst side, right? There's not a gap in our ability to collect telemetry and pull this all together. And you think of work from home nowadays, right? The hybrid work, certainly you want to be able to grab that telemetry in those home offices as much as you want to collect it when they're in the office on campus, as an example. Firewall analytics, so suspicious user agent, you might have unusual external server, unusual file extensions to a new external server, and then a bunch of other on-premise type detection mechanisms that you can leverage as well. So these again are just examples of that, and they're all good, but again, they mean very little unless you have context wrapped around it. And I know I've been harping on context a lot, but I think as defenders, we've got to move up higher in that stack in order to at least even out the playing field. I'm not sure that we're going to win every game, but we're going to get it where we're going to be winning more of the games than losing. And when we lose, this is the biggest piece of the puzzle. When we do lose, we have the ability to scope, contain, and remediate that very quickly, that the damage is less significant than we've seen in the past, but more importantly, that the organization has continued to be operational during that time. So attack chaining, this is where alerts come in from multiple different products, and we've correlated them prior to creating an incident within the platform itself. There's common indicators that are combined into these attack chains, and new alerts as they come in are appended to those incidents as they occur over time as well. And again, the nice thing about this is I can drill in to get more information here, but also I have these drop-down boxes here that I can take action against certain things if I choose to do so. But this is an overall overview of an incident that has been created within the platform, and then you see detection, response, and workload, and we're going to go through a little bit of that. So attack chaining, as I mentioned, we've got the alert sources that are coming in, NetFlow, firewall, IPS, observations, IP addresses, host names, devices, usernames, and then we start stitching them together. And as we do that, we get better context and understanding, and we align this to the MITRE attack framework. So what you'll see is we've got a progressive view of the data. So very quickly, we can come in and see a subset of data. I'm going to show you that in the next slide, I believe. But the goal here is that we've correlated data over time, revealing the big picture, and ultimately showing anything as significant as multi-stage attacks as well, because we're pulling it all together. A lot of times in organizations, what we see is reinfection constantly. They think they've got it sorted. They may even reimage assets, and they find out that there's reinfection. It could be as simple as there was a DNS request that was made that was off-premise, that telemetry source was never captured, and that asset continues to make that request off-site, comes back on site, and continues to infect the organization. So we see reinfection occur, and primarily based on not having full understanding of the threat that took place. Incident creation, as I mentioned, it gets created. This is what I mentioned earlier. When you see an alert, we give it a priority, and I'll talk about priority and how that's how that number is calculated. But the bottom line is that when I see an event, when I click on that event, I then get a summarized short form view of what's happening. So I can then click on this and it'll show me all the tactics that have been associated to this particular alert or event or incident. It gives me a short description, long description, gives me some indicators. Here's the MITRE tactics. I can then pivot into the full incident and get visualization as well. But it allows us to show the data as needed for you to make decisions in order to move forward. And again, here is your priorities. You can see they're all color coded. You've got the names of them and then the sources. So we also highlight the sources where we got that event triggered from. And so you can see here is, Cisco Secure Endpoint. There might be a third-party technology that provided that data. And then we take that detection risk, multiply it by the asset value, and we come up with the priority score. 1,000 is bad, red is bad. And so that's where you're going to probably spend your time dealing with these particular incidents with the highest level score based on the asset. So adding the asset value is important. And so you want to do that where your higher value assets are actually scored as 10 and less valuable assets are scored less. Some people just use the default of 10. And that, as I mentioned, you take the detection risk. This is based on MITRE TTPs, financial risks, the number of TTPs, the source of severity. So there's some logic that goes into determining the detection risk. And then the asset value, again, this is a number that you as an organization will give the asset. The default is 10, and then it's multiplied. So if the detection risk is 92, the asset value is 8, then it's 736, and you can see it's orange. It doesn't even fall under that high level red score. So visually, you can see based on the number and the color that it's not as important as something that's red and 1,000. So again, this is just showing you context when you're in the platform. So we were at the overview. Now we've moved to detection. We can, parse this in all kinds of different ways, whether source, severity, investigated or not. But as I mentioned, these little things here, these drop down buttons here allow me to take action if I choose to do so. And if I want to do additional analysis, it may allow me to do something like pivot into my malware analytics platform as an example, right? So then I can look at that data and how it was enriched in the sandbox to get additional insight into some of the behaviorals or indicators that I might have seen or registry entries that were created. So again, a little bit more data if I need to pivot, but I could take action from here as well. And this is that progressive disclosure. So you see the event, right? Gives you a good insight into priority, the indicators, any associated MITRE attack tactics and techniques that are associated with it by clicking on here. And then I get to see here the adversary. I don't even know what this is. What is this, right? The adversary is trying to run a malicious code. It gives you good insight. You can pivot into MITRE directly. And then you also can pivot into the incident itself and then get a visualization or attack chain of all the elements that have been associated with that particular attack itself. And again, I can see the collection of assets that are associated to this particular event, as well as the observations. And I have the ability to drop down or drill into some of these as needed. So this simplified graphical view, right? All of my indicators, observations, assets, color coded here. Red is malicious, purple is an asset within the organization. File names, the SHA-256, I can pivot into full screen rate from here as well. And up top here, you can see we keep track of those TTPs, right? Very, very important when we're elevating our ability to defend. Again, this just shows a little bit more filtering, just a bigger screen, but we can have it where it shows us only the important elements that we need to focus on. Again, if you want to see everything, you can certainly do that. But if you want to look at the items that we feel or deem as important, you can actually click that and it'll allow us to view that data. Built-in playbooks. Now, we've got overview, detection, now we're in response. And in response, you can see we use PICRL, the incident response model from SANS. You've got identification, containment, eradication, and recovery. This is what I mentioned earlier that's going to walk you through that process. So we saw that email that came in. Remember, it made a DNS request. It went out to a domain. A process started on an endpoint that made a connection to something external that might have been bad. Well, now we have that full context within that attack chain. And now we're going to drive specific outcomes based on now our understanding of what took place for the organization. And so now I could say, you know what? I might want to come in here and contain the incident based on domains. I might want to contain it based on assets. So I might want to stop the spread of malware by isolating a host or two. And so when I hit select here, based on the integrations, I can select the host that I want to invoke whatever it is that I'm trying to invoke. And then I hit execute and done. Right? I've already provided a response action to minimize my exposure in the organization. And this is through a manual process. But we also have the ability to be able to watch for things and drive automated response as well. We track everything. We track collaboration and auditing, pivot menus, incident playbooks, and automation. These are all driven from here. Go to eradication right from this button and drive specific outcomes. Those pivot menus I've mentioned multiple different times. When I click on it, it allows me to block a user in a duo. Multi-factor no longer works for that particular user. And now I'm minimizing my exposure to applications because credentials may have been stolen. Response playbooks, we have the ability to drive all kinds of automations from the platform. We can identify, contain, eradicate, and then recover systems as well. We just announced a partnership with Cohesity, the ability to snapshot and recover assets if ransomware is discovered through an automated process as well. But this could be through an approval, task rule, email rule, incident rule, or schedule rule. So there's lots of different ways to drive that outcome. I can watch for email coming in and then drive a specific workflow based on that email. I could say, you know what? I don't want you to isolate an asset until a senior leader accepts that intent. And once they accept it, then the workflow will continue. So you can build in some checks and balances throughout the platform, but XDR is detection and response, right? Leveraging the entire ecosystem, but more importantly, the automation capabilities and playbooks that are also built into the platform. It's no to low code, it's drag and drop. You might have to fill in some API keys, but it's got a ton of capabilities where you might say, here's the start. I want to pull in some reporting from Umbrella. And then you could have conditions wrapped around this. You can use Python, any programmatic capability that you might want to drive towards. You can drive outcomes across all kinds of different technology stacks using native controls within operating systems as well. So there's a lot of creativity that can go into this. There's tons of these playbooks that have already been pre-built. So if you have ICE, for example, we can have a playbook that looks for a certain threat in the organization, find out what the asset is. Once we find out the asset, then we maybe drive an isolation at 2 in the morning when the folks are on call but don't have to jump on a call to remediate it. It's in fact at least mitigated enough to allow folks to maybe sleep a little bit longer before they have to come in and triage it even further. So in summary, before I hand it back, faster detections, right? Because we're getting all the detections that we're seeing everywhere pulled into a single platform. It helps us simplify investigation through that one console, very quickly identify threat and its impact and relevance across the organization. And then more importantly, rapid containment, right? How do we stay resilient? Well, it's our ability to be able to adjust as the adversary makes their ways in the environment without having to shut the business down. Ultimately being able to recover as soon as possible, but contain the adversary because you may need to contain before you have the ability to fully mitigate the threat. So that's it on the Cisco XDR side. I'll hand it back over to the rest of the team to close it out.
All right, thank you for that, Jason. That was an excellent demonstration. And I really like the summary at the end, because really you're leveraging an XDR platform for faster detections, simplified investigations, and rapid containment. Because the key thing is reduce the mean time to detect and mean time to contain a threat, right, to minimize the damage to the organization. Thank you for that. With that said, let me introduce myself. This is Talha Iqbal. I'm the Director of Cyber Intelligence Center at Strategem, which is our 24/7, 365 managed security operations center. I'm responsible for the overall service delivery, which includes incident response, managed security solutions, including XDR, and continuous optimization and enhancement of security controls. I've been with Strategem for over 5 years and in the security industry for over 10. And I'll take a few minutes to talk about how Strategem can leverage managed Cisco XDR to deliver comprehensive threat defense. With that said, if you guys can confirm, you can see my screen. Excellent. Perfect, thank you. So let's move on. I want to start by an introductory message from our president and CEO, John Menezes. Now, Strategem is an innovative managed security service provider that offers security as a service solution. We leverage the potential of cybersecurity mesh architecture that represents a distributed and interconnected approach to cybersecurity. Now, this model is not centered around a single point or perimeter, but is integrated into the entire digital ecosystem. This allows organizations to access robust security services without heavy investments in infrastructure, and also focus on flexibility and scalability without compromising on security. Now, our approach is to ensure visibility by leveraging a SIEM solution that collects all the log data. We then enrich that data with threat intelligence feeds, vulnerability and data net flows, and also improve threat detection, improve contextual understanding about the nature and origin of threats, prioritizing your vulnerabilities, enhancing incident response and threat hunting capabilities, which allows us to have a mature security posture, allows us to have efficient and effective controls that ultimately defends the organization against the most common indicators of compromise and threats. Now, the way we achieve this is by leveraging cybersecurity mesh architecture. The cybersecurity mesh architecture allows us to integrate various industry standard tools to create a safe and protective layer around your infrastructure. Now, the cybersecurity mesh architecture is a concept developed by Gartner to help improve or to help organizations move past siloed security to a more collaborative and flexible approach. We were able to successfully deploy this to multiple customers, leveraging their existing security investments and using API integration and other integration techniques to ensure that we have threat intel data, we have timely detections, and can understand the security risks, which are then allowed us to implement preventive controls. These preventive controls can then work together to keep the organization secure. So here in this example, you can see how EDR, identity management, privilege access management, email security, network defense, vulnerability management, your web application firewalls, SASE, SOAR, and XDR are all interconnected to detect, contain, and eliminate the threat. What we have done is we have partnered with leading vendors in the security space like Cisco to ensure that we seamlessly integrate and deliver superior outcomes to our customer. Now, some of the challenges that organizations face today, especially with XDR as a tool, don't let your XDR be a siloed product, right? While XDR is a great tool with high potential to secure and defend your organization, but don't let XDR be a siloed product. Your investment in an XDR will not give you the optimized value if you don't have the expertise to continuously integrate, enhance, and monitor the platform. Now, don't let your XDR run in isolation. organizations today are faced with challenges in the management and continuous operation of the XDR tool, mainly related to data integration complexity, which is to get all the key data points and all the tools to integrate and work together seamlessly. This has been a continuous challenge for most organizations. In addition to that, data volume and analysis produces another challenge. Analyzing all the data to find that needle in the haystack, to find that key suspicious activity that would lead to an otherwise high-risk scenario. Now, an XDR can help complement this challenge, but what to look for and how to analyze that detection can be difficult for organization, which then leads to false positive and false negatives. That includes resource fatigue. You spend time and resources on something that is not crucial or that is not a suspicious activity. And in doing so, you miss a real issue, you miss a real threat. Now, contextual understanding and fine-tuning of the platform is also a key. XDR can help you decide if something is safe or risky. However, just like humans, you need to understand and you need to ensure that your tool is continuously learning and you are able to detect the complexity of the detections, and the appropriate playbooks and workbooks are configured to respond to it. Now, integration with different tools in order to take a preventive action can also be a challenge for most organizations. Here, in order to address this, you need to ensure that you have compatibility with different security investments like EDR, like network defense, vulnerability management, and your firewalls in order to build efficient and effective playbooks to respond in a timely manner. Oftentimes, organizations are also faced with alert fatigue. Now think of XDR as your watchful guard that tells you when there's a problem. Now, if it keeps telling you about every little thing, you might stop paying attention. The XDR has the potential to reduce the number of alerts. However, you need a team of expertise in order to review and define what is important from a risk perspective and what is legitimate authorized activity for your organization. Incident response and coordination can also be a challenge. Keep in mind that XDR can find the problem, it can timely detect a problem, and you can have workflows that can respond to contain that threat. However, you need to have efficient incident response and coordination to recover from an incident. Last but not the least is continuous monitoring and update. You need to ensure that you have the expertise who are keeping your playbooks, your workflows, and using the right data connectors for integration. So you need to have all these expertise and you need to overcome these challenges in order to get the most value and leverage the true potential of an XDR. Now, keep in mind that this is not to discredit an XDR by any means. However, if you mitigate this challenge, then you need to partner with a managed security service provider who have the expertise on managing an XDR solution. That brings me to my next slide here, which is Strategim's Managed Extended Detection and Response. This service has its benefits and you can easily overcome the challenges that I mentioned earlier. We have the expertise and a team of highly skilled cybersecurity professionals with experience and expertise in threat detection, incident response, ensuring accurate threat detection and response procedures so that we can have effective decision making to protect your organization. We deliver 24/7 monitoring of your security tools, your security environment, and our cyber intelligence center is actively watching for any indicators of compromise or any suspicious activity. This allows us to minimize the window of opportunity for attackers to breach your systems. Now, as part of managed XDR, Strategim integrates and leverages the latest threat intelligence. This is to identify emergent threats and identify new attack techniques and vulnerabilities. Leveraging threat intelligence can enhance the detection capabilities, allowing the organization to proactively defend against the latest cybersecurity threats. This in turn leads to reducing alert fatigue. Instead of overwhelming your team with a flood of alerts, Strategim can filter out and correlate alerts, focusing on genuine alerts, focusing on the true indicators of compromise, which in turn allows us to reduce the noise and the number of false positives so that you can focus on critical issues, improving the overall efficiency of your security operations. Now, upon detection, we need swift incident response and effective remediation. Strategim leveraging managed XDR, in this case, Cisco's playbooks and workflows, will be able to analyze the situation, determine the scope of the breach, and initiate appropriate response action. This allows us to reduce the mean time to detect, mean time to contain, and mean time to resolve an incident. So with Stratagem, you get cost efficiency and resource optimization. By outsourcing, you avoid the expenses associated with hiring, training, and retaining specialized security personnel. And last, I want to end this session by mentioning that Stratagem was recognized by Gartner in its most recent market guide, which is a testament to our ability to execute and leverage our managed XDR to bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and the right tools to the table. This allows organizations to focus on its core operations while benefiting from expert cybersecurity services. Partnering with Stratagem and leveraging Cisco's XDR will ensure that your cybersecurity strategy is aligned with industry best practices, leading to enhanced detection and rapid incident response, which ultimately leads to a stronger security posture. With that said, thank you guys for your time, and stick around because we'll have a random draw which allows you to win a drone, a Cisco labeled drone that you can win today. With that said, I'm going to pass it over to Nisreen.
Thanks, Talal. Really appreciate that, Jason. Thanks so much for your insights today. Excellent presentation. So for the Cisco Secure Drone, we've drawn the lucky winner, and it is the CTO of PX Solutions, James Ross. So congratulations. We'll be in contact with you to get that over. So for the time being, this concludes the session. We'll be sending out an email with the recording and any questions that were asked during this session with a corresponding answer. And if you'd like to get in contact with either myself, Talal, or Jason, we'll leave all our contact details in the forthcoming email. Thank you so much for everyone's time today, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, folks.